Good afternoon. 19th meeting of the Rotary Club of South Jacksonville. I'd like to thank Vicki and Steve. Was Steve our greeter as well? Did I see you, Steve?
Just Vicki. Sure.
Just Vicki. Thank you, Vicki. Vicki Shirt.
All right.
And I'd like to invite Dina pulling up for our reflection and pledge. Is Dina here? Dina is not here. Would anyone like to volunteer today for our reflection and pledge?
I was AWOL last week, I think it was, for visitors and guests. Did you bail me out of that, Sherman?
He did.
Thank you very much. Let's please bow our heads. Off the bench, ladies and gentlemen. Dear Lord, thank you for such another fabulous day. And thank you for the opportunity for us Rotarians to gather together, enjoy fellowship, and do good, try to do good for our community and international. In thy name we pray. In your name, amen.
Amen.
All right, here we go.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Harlan. Okay, just checking for Barry to see
You're on the way to South Africa.
that Barry's on his way to South Africa. I forgot. Okay. So
Can we do just a quick family rotary?
yes, we can do a quick family rotary.
So I would like to present this to President Leslie for her new grandson.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mark Musgrove Jr. Was born March 3rd. I'm so excited. He's my second grandchild here in Jacksonville. Thank you. Doing that, I would like to present something as well. So we have another one for Shad. I'm sorry, call Shad for his son, Wilson Scott Shad.
You two should know.
Okay. We are going to, I'd like to invite Jan Stringer up for her craft talk.
Good afternoon to everybody. Continue eating your lunch and enjoy. It's delicious. I also want to thank President Leslie for inviting me to do this very, very much. I am with ERA Davis & Lynn and have been for about 12 years. One of our broker owners, Andrew Lynn, is with us today. So everybody say hello to Andrew. Many of you know him and his father, who's our other broker owner, Jim Lynn. ERA Davis & Lynn has been in business for about 42 years. And we come under the umbrella of a company that is traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It's one of the largest real estate holding companies in the world. It is Anywhere Real Estate, formerly Realogy. And under this umbrella, there come a number of different brands, ERA being one, Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Better Homes and Gardens, Sotheby's, and the Corcoran Group. And with all of these groups combined, we do about of all the residential real estate sales in the United States. So we're going to talk today about the market, which is of interest to everybody. Everybody knows that we've had changing culture where our real estate market is concerned, both residential and commercial. We're mostly going to talk about residential. 2019 was our last normal year in what we would consider normal for the real estate industry. We always have market ebbs and flows. But what we did experience was a culture change. Some of the factors are, of course, COVID and the interest rates rising, and a flood of cash buyers that came normally consider a large majority of the market, which are folks that are also seeking a mortgage. So that was challenging, to say the least, for a lot of buyers. We had migration to during COVID from Oregon, California, Washington State, Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York. Those are the primary areas that we saw this migration. And they were, all these folks were relocating to Texas, number one, Florida, number two, Tennessee and Georgia was tied for three, and North and South Carolina tied for four. What we saw in Florida was initially a large migration towards South Florida, Miami, and then that changed to Tampa. And then we saw a change that is current, and that is Jacksonville. Over the last number of weeks, we have had terrific presentations by folks talking about the not only the beauty of our area, the draw that people have and are coming to our area, but they're coming in large numbers. So that was, it's interesting for all of us. The appeal is the same appeal that it is for us. The reason that we either love living here or drew us to the area. And that has to do with our business climate as well as our climate. We are most fortunate to have all of our natural resources, the beautiful oceans and rivers, St. Augustine, Fernandina, South Georgia, North Florida, and expanding into areas, which has been a bit of an interesting phenomenon. As people were coming to our area, they were coming because of our business-friendly climate, our relationship-oriented city. Jacksonville is a very relationship-oriented city. We know this. Most of us have lived here most of our lives. But that's what people were seeking. In addition to affordability, we are more affordable than South Florida, than Tampa, Sarasota, Fort Myers, those areas. We also tend to have a bit more land in certain areas. And what we're seeing is a growth from new home construction, which is in northern Duval County, also, as we already know, St. Johns County. And one of the reasons for that has to do with not only new construction in the schools that we know about, but many of these national and regional builders are able to provide mortgage rate buydowns. And that is very appealing, obviously, in this particular market that we're all living in. What I would also tell you is that there is expansion into areas that have not been typical for us. But as we have had, let's say the darlings of our particular area have always been the beaches and San Marco, Riverside, Avondale, and others. Folks are also migrating towards Baker County, Putnam County, McLennan, to Palatka, and certainly Clay County still. And again, it has to do with affordability. There's more land. There are large plots of land that are being acquired as we speak in those areas. And so that's certainly a change for us, but a welcome change. And again, that's what continues to bring people to us, not just to Jacksonville, but also into northern Duval County, into South Georgia. In particular, one of the city that I want to mention to you is also Hastings, and Hastings has become extremely popular. And for that reason, our company has also expanded. So we have an office in Palm Coast, as well as Jacksonville, and also Kingsland, Georgia. So this is just a little bit about what we see that's going on in the market and wanted to share with you today. And I know that we've got another fabulous speaker that's going to tell us about the museum in St. Augustine. So again, we continue to hear about the wonderful draws that we have. and that, again, we all enjoy and other folks are going to enjoy. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Jan. For our announcements, I'd like to invite Lisa Marie Winslow up.
Just want to give an update on the gala, and if we have time at the end, we'll go through the e-bike and the sponsorships. But I'm very excited to share with you that we already have twice the amount of table sponsorships as we did last year already. We had 3 table sponsorships last year. We already have 6. I encourage you on the sponsorships. Right now, the tables are the cheapest they're going to be. They go up in a week. So for members, if you're thinking about bringing other people to the event, which we want you to bring other people to the event, it's the best deal. So the sponsorship of a table right now is $800. It will eventually be $1,600. So if you are a member and you want to bring people, I strongly encourage you to think about purchasing a table and or sharing a table with another member, because it is a really good value. Basically, it's $100 per ticket. Otherwise, everybody knows that every member will be billed for tickets, and that will happen at the end of the event. The Eventbrite site, if you haven't gone to check it out, I believe the link has been provided in the gear now the past couple of weeks. We're sending it out regularly. It is for other people. It's not for us to be using to buy our tickets. We will all be billed for our tickets. Sponsorship packages go for as low as $250 and as much as $1,600. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I do want to thank everybody who's already donated wine and bourbon. Bring more, bring more, bring more. Last year we ran out so quickly, and it was a really big fundraiser for us at the event. Other great activities being planned for the event, and we'll continue to share at the meeting. And if I do have time at the end, we'll show you the sponsorship form and the Eventbrite site, because I know last week we didn't get a chance to go through that. Any questions? I know Barry had a question on the sponsorships, and I tried to get back to him, but he wasn't available before they left to go to the country. Anyone? All right. Well, thank you. Turn it back over.
Thank you. Just want to remind everybody about registering for the district assembly and district conference. Registration is now open. Please check out the DAC-DB calendar and get registered. That's May 3rd and 4th at UNF. And now I'd like to, Kyrie here? No? Okay. All right, let me see. Do we have any visitors and guests today?
We have Andrew Lynn. Here he is once again.
Andrew, welcome.
This is my wonderful coworker, Samantha Hewlett. She works at Cushman & Wakefield as a assistant property manager.
Great, welcome. That's it.
Oh. That was your music, not yours.
Don't sit down, Mike. I have you introducing our speaker.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Ed, just a quick check. Are you able to hear me?
You are wall to wall.
Hear me.
Are you able to hear me? That's the question.
Oh, yeah, we can hear you well. So I'd like to introduce Ed Lamont to you. Ed is a docent at the Whitehall Flagler Museum. And for those of you who don't know who Flagler was, he hung out with some guy. Both of them. Do you know who Flagler is?
Little rich man.
Yeah, yeah. So he starts off without a whole lot, just like a guy named Rockefeller, and they decided to do this thing with oil stuff. And at the time, oil, I mean, you're laughing, but oil was just stuff that came out of the ground. What do you do with it? But they figured out stuff to do with it, and they figured out a whole bunch of stuff. They were co-equals, and he decided he wanted to bag it and come down to some other place. So Ed has a really interesting sidelight in that he's got his regular job, and then he is the docent at the museum. Since 1991, he's led over 3,000 tours at the Whitehall Museum. He was recognized as the Interpretive Docent of the Year in 2001, 2006, and 2007. He leads historical tours of the Breakers Hotel. How many have been to the Breakers? How many people have been thrown out of the Breakers because you just don't fit? They just didn't know you probably. And he leads discussions about a variety of things. And the interesting part was, it was suggested to me that I needed to call Ed up because they said, we just had a presentation down in South Florida. He is tremendous. He knows history. So I call up Ed thinking, let's find out if this guy even knows how to use Zoom. And then I find out he's constantly on Zoom. We start talking about 2 history books I read about Flagler. And he goes, well, if you really want the one, it's Bubble in the Sun. Anybody read this? Okay. Really interesting, Jan, because boy, you nailed it. Right now we're talking about people moving to Florida. Well, Jacksonville was the place in about 1880s because we had the river, and that was the gateway to Central Florida. Everybody else, pretty much nothing. So we were the big city at probably about 10,000 people. And then this guy comes along who's interested in a nice place at St. Augustine because, it was kind of cruddy down there where he had to stay. So I'll let Ed explain how that suddenly kind of popped the cork underneath Jacksonville. And we started watching as people, instead of coming to Jacksonville, as Jan said, they started going down to this malaria-infested swamp that people were calling Miami, like miasma. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. And you will find Ed, when you talk history of Florida, Ed is the person. You talk aviation history, you talk to Ed Booth. You talk history of Florida, you're talking Ed Lamont. So Ed, take it away.
I appreciate it, Mike. Thank you very much. It's an honor to speak to a Rotary chapter. I love speaking to any group that starts their meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance. So thank you very much for that. And Mike, I do not see the audience. So if you need to get this shepherd's hook out to yank me off, just interrupt me at some point, okay? I will keep an eye on the time as we talked about before. Today is one day after the 99th anniversary of the Breakers Hotel burning to the ground. It was an event that quite literally could have changed Florida, but fortunately didn't, and I'll see if I can explain why. You've kind of introduced this fella, Henry Morrison Flagler. He is what I call the father of modern Florida. It's kind of a bold statement, but I'll make it. I think he had more influence on this state than any other human being had on the state of Florida. His investment in Florida, he said once, I would have been a rich man if it wasn't for that state. His vision, and I mean very much like we talk about visualization now in business, we have to see what we're trying to accomplish before we accomplish it, and his energy. His idea of retirement was to build a railroad from Jacksonville that would eventually extend all the way down to Key West. Some people retire a little bit differently than others. So for that reason, I do call him the father of modern Florida. And I know it's kind of a brash statement to say he had more influence on this state than anybody else, but he did. And I'll even take it further and say he probably had more influence on the state of Florida than any other person, any other human being had on any other state in our country. And I'll argue with you Brigham Young fans on that. But the fact of the matter is, Florida was changed by Flagler. When he arrived here, it was remote. When he left about 25 years ago, it was resort. And this is part of the story I get to tell you, and I'll be sure we get to that. But before we do that, we got to burn down a couple buildings. This lithograph is one that I found just this morning to put up here. It kind of makes a point Mike was making to me earlier, is that he started in the First Coast, would eventually work his way all the way down to Miami. What do you call it? Miasma? I'll have to let them know that. And eventually down to Key West. But as you'll find before we're done with this, he found his way back up to the First Coast in Jacksonville before he was done building. So this is a great picture of what he did from a transportation standpoint, from a resort standpoint, and quite frankly, also from a steamship standpoint. Everybody knows about the railroads, but a lot of people don't realize his steamship system literally knit together this part of our hemisphere to the Bahamas, to Havana, to Tampa. The transportation grid that Mr. Flagler would create back at the early part of the 20th century literally changed this place from America's last eastern frontier to what a great state it is now. He built 5 hotels before he ever built the breakers. 3 of them up in St. Augustine, 1 in Ormond Beach, 1 in Palm Beach called the Royal Ponciana. And the first breakers was really a step down hotel for the Royal Ponciana. It was more where you would go to change clothes and then go to the beach. They didn't even call it the breakers. They called it the Inn or the Palm Beach Inn. Something happened in the late 1890s. Beach bathing became the rage. This was Flagler's first hotel on the ocean. A lot of people don't realize that he built most of his hotels well inland. But beach bathing became the rage. Ladies, you donned your bathing suits, and that would interest the men. Now, understand, your bathing suit started somewhere below your ankle and would go to about your throat, but it was better than what we had before. So beach bathing became very popular. People wanted to go down by the breakers and stay at the Palm Beach Inn. It became his most popular hotel. He would add to it over a period of time. Opened at first in 1896, but eventually by 1900, it would have this appearance. By the way, these are Flagler colors. He loved Flagler yellow. I had a tie that was Flagler yellow one time that someone said burnt their retina, but that's okay. Flagler liked it. And it looked good with a green cypress roof. But what happens to wooden hotels in Florida? They burn. All right. We have our dry season. We have our not so dry season. So after season was over in 1906, I believe it was 1903. I'm sorry. The first breakers burned to the ground. The season was over. So by June 9th, there were no people staying at the hotel. Everybody you see on the beach here, they were residents. They were workers. They were part of keeping the Palm Beach community building during the off-season period. They had to make a decision. Mr. Flagler was still with us at that point, but they had to make a decision. Would they rebuild or not? And they decided to rebuild exactly as it was before. Bad idea, because during construction, that breakers burned down. So eventually they decided to build a more luxurious breakers hotel, which would open in 1905. This breakers hotel is still wood, but it's much more high end. It wasn't just a place to go and change your clothes and go to the beach. It was a hotel that was fabulously successful, especially during the 19 teens. Europe was ablaze with a world war. A lot of folks that used to go to the Riviera, used to go to Mediterranean resorts and such, they stopped going there, not because there was fighting going on, but the people that worked there were now in service to their country, fighting during the First World War. So they would come to Florida, and the Florida hotels that Flagler had built, 3 of them in St. Augustine, 1 in Ormond Beach, and now 2 in Palm Beach, as well as 1 in Miami Beach, became very popular. They've never stopped coming, and that's a good thing for us. This hotel was a grand hotel, but again, just like any other wooden hotel in Florida, including one I'm going to talk about a little bit later up in Atlantic Beach, it would burn to the ground. It happened the day after St. Patrick's Day of 1925. What happened? Well, it was in season. We don't know for sure the cause of the fire. It was initially blamed on the former mayor of Chicago, Big Bill Thompson, his wife's newfangled curling iron. Blame the ladies, right? Isn't that what they do? Well, supposedly she left it plugged in, and that's what started the fire. I don't believe it. I don't. Fact is, it was one room, one little fire in there. They would have gotten that under control. I believe it was something in the laundry. They had a huge laundry. It might have been wiring. By 1925, the wiring here was 20 years old. There could have been an issue there. But for whatever reason, this hotel would burn to the ground. In 1925, Henry Flagler was no more. He died in 1913. It was his wife's family that still ran the Florida East Coast hotel system. They had to make a really big financial decision. Would they rebuild? You mentioned Miami, and they were building hotels there already. They had the Biltmore, which is down in Coral Gables. They had several of the hotels that were in Miami Beach that Fisher had lured hotel builders to build. The fact is, if they weren't going to build quickly, they may lose their traffic. So they did make a decision to rebuild the hotel. But before we rebuild the hotel, let me give you an idea of some of the people that would stay there, the A-listers that would stay at this hotel. I'm going to need your help on this. You tell me if you know who these people are, okay? Anybody recognize this lady? She was unsinkable because she was on the Titanic. I think I heard it, the unsinkable Molly Brown. She was a guest there as well. I bet you recognize this lady. Maybe yes, maybe no. This is Marjorie Merriweather Post, C.W. Post's daughter, the lady who built Mar-a-Lago down here, which is now the private Trump club. She was also an extremely wealthy lady who had the good fortune of marrying an extremely wealthy man named E.F. Hutton. E.F. Hutton had a stock brokerage at the Breakers. So she was there to help him salvage some of his files, of paper files and such, and get them out of the Breakers before it burned to the ground. They didn't have a cloud back then. So if you were going to salvage something, you had to actually go in there and get it. And Marjorie Merriweather Post was recognized by the papers down here as doing heroic work for her friends, salvaging things that were literally being thrown out windows, money, jewelry, furs were being thrown out windows, and she was out on the lawn of the Breakers helping them salvage those. Great lady. I'd love to come talk to you about Marjorie Merriweather Post one day. She was, I call her America's Grande Dame, but she was so much more than that. Anybody know who this is?
The good witch, Glinda.
This is the good witch, Glinda, but what was her name in real life? It was Billie Burke, if that rings any bells. Billie Burke was at that time the wife of Flo Ziegfeld of Ziegfeld Follies. That wouldn't last. Flo Ziegfeld was kind of a mess, and he went through several wives. But she was a good friend of Marjorie Merriweather Post and Molly Brown. So Marjorie Merriweather Post also helped the good witch Glinda, or Billie Burke, salvage some of her materials as well. So the idea was, it was all hands on deck at that point. And frankly, it was a pretty traumatic moment. Like I say, Mr. Flagler wasn't around anymore. They had to make a decision if they were going to build, if they were going to try to continue to attract these A-listers down to Palm Beach. They had the Royal Ponciana Hotel on the lakeside, but frankly, that was a big wooden hotel too, and it was starting to become somewhat outdated. They made the decision to go ahead and rebuild the Breakers. It took them only 9 months to create this. This Breakers would be open, and you recognize it as it is today, in 1927, and it was advertised throughout the country as the Fireproof Breakers. So far, so good. Okay. The Breakers is much different than what it is today. They've added, and I'll show you the section they added onto it. But the Breakers would then anchor tourism in Palm Beach quite literally since 1927. I mean, the idea of Palm Beach without a Breakers. How many have ever flown either into Palm Beach from the ocean into Palm Beach International? This hotel sits there like a tiara, a diamond tiara that everybody gawks at as they fly almost right over it. The Breakers was built, and it was kind of a, what would I say? It reminds me of when we had the pandemic. The pandemic, everything closed. What was next? What are we going to do? Everything stacked against us. The lady talked about that in terms of real estate, that there were some not only changes, but almost cultural and changes in that regard too. But the breakers being rebuilt, to me, stands out as a huge success. In other words, despite the fire, despite the fact that in 1926, as the bubble in the sun talks about, there was a huge bust in building. And it wasn't just in South Florida, it was also in Clearwater, St. Pete, Tampa, St. Augustine. It was throughout the entire state. There were embargoes on Flagler's Railroad because too much stuff was trying to get down here to build the ever expanding areas that are now ever expanding again. But this hotel would be built, and I think it stood as a symbol of endurance, that even during bad times, hurricanes, uh, um, economic busts and things like that, you can still get something done. Well, if you have enough money. It was a $7 million project when it opened, and quite frankly, it has never, ever been unprofitable. Here it is today, a kind of colorized photo, not like it's color photo of it. And what you don't see in the previous picture is on the right-hand side. They built about $250 million, $250 million convention center next to it. They also redid the pools and the restaurants that were outside. And today, the Breakers has regained its 4-star from Mobile. It's also gained 5 stars and is back where it was before some of the economic problems we had back in the at the end of the whenever that was, whenever prices went down. It has also served proudly and patriotically. Many of the hotels during World War II would become hospitals. The Breakers Hotel became the Ream Army Air Corps Hospital from 1942 until 1944. It closed regular operations. Those troops that would go to Northern Africa to fight, they were naval airmen and army airmen. The Air Force wasn't actually created separately until after World War II. So those flyers would come for some rest and relaxation at the Breakers, also to be handled if they were wounded. What's most important about that is that during that time, there were 18 Breakers babies born in this hotel. These breaker babies are much loved and venerated. When they come to the hotel, they are treated like gold. Now, again, that's between 1942 and 44. So we're talking, they're now 80, 78 to 80 years old. And there are fewer than we had before. But I've had a breaker's baby on tour before, and it was a very, very special moment. So the Breakers really has, to me, both patriotic, endurance, and economic highlights. That's why I like talking about the place, because it's more than just a place where rich people go. Okay, it's a place that stands for what's positive, what's the best, and really what we can achieve in Florida. Let me take a real quick breath before I jump ahead here. But does anybody have any questions about the Breakers? Because I'm going to talk about some of the other hotels as well, if you don't mind. Seeing and hearing no questions, I will move forward. And again, just stop me because I don't have a visual, okay? I mentioned that Mr. Flagler worked his way down the state. 3 hotels in St. Augustine, 2 in Palm Beach, 1 in Ormond Beach, 1 in Miami. Eventually, he'd have 2 hotels in the Bahamas. But he would come back up the state to build his only summertime hotel in Atlantic Beach. The idea with this hotel was some of the folks that were after the hotel was closed for season, they didn't want to leave. They wanted another place to go. So it made sense, as far north as the First Coast is, to have a hotel up there. It'd be much more comfortable than maybe building a summer hotel down here in Miami or Fort Lauderdale. It was a bit more plain because they also wanted to develop traffic locally and out of South Georgia. So you didn't have to be a financial titan to get a room here. Very similar in style. And you'll notice that many of Mr. Flagler's hotels are similar in style, actually have interchangeable parts, as you can say, kind of like a chain, doors, window frames, things like that. You could fit one up here at Atlantic Beach at the Continental Hotel, as well as down at the Royal Palm Hotel in Miami Beach. They were all the same size. And that was very modern back then. He did not have a lot of success with this hotel. Eventually, he would lease it to somebody else to operate it in 1908 after about 6, 7 years. years. They even renamed it the Atlantic Beach Hotel. And like the breakers, it burned to the ground in 1919. And I'm going to have to come up there and see for myself to see what replaced it. But I imagine it's a lot of oceanfront condos and wonderful places to visit. But the idea here was it was his only summertime hotel and one of his first oceanfront hotels. They didn't build in the ocean back then. By the way, when they first went to construct this hotel, they wanted to make it perpendicular to the shore, not parallel. Why in the world they wanted to do it that way, I don't know. But I'm glad somebody changed their mind to make it parallel to the ocean. I think if it's perpendicular, everybody gets an ocean view as opposed to an ocean front. But you know what? I think the idea of having ocean front was a better choice. Oh, by the way, somebody mentioned Hastings as one of the largest growing areas. The architects for this hotel and his hotels in St. Augustine were Carrera and Hastings. And the fellow Hastings there was related to the folks that would name Hastings up in your area. Little bit of biography, but you let me know if I can take another 2 or 3 minutes to show off his other hotels. I'd like to do that. That's me. That's me. Forget him. This is now Flagler College. This was Flagler's first hotel. It's called the Ponce de Leon Hotel. It was not wooden. It was a concrete hotel that really anchored tourism. Mr. Flagler would come to St. Augustine with his first wife. She was a consumptive. She had tuberculosis, and it was thought that the um, climate down here would be conducive to her health. It was, but it wasn't a cure, and eventually she would pass away. His second wife, a lady who I got to tell you about later because that's a long story, she eventually went insane, but she was Grande Dame of St. Augustine and would literally hold court in this hotel, as well as these two other hotels, the Alcazar, which is still there. By the way, get down to the Alcazar Hotel. It's not a hotel anymore, and go to the Alcazar Cafe. It's in a swimming pool inside the hotel if you've ever gotten down there. Really, really fun. Hotel Cordova is still a hotel in St. Augustine. So he had a kind of a courtyard of 3 hotels in St. Augustine, but he would push south to Ormond Beach. Another man built part of this hotel. Flagler would buy it and expand it. The Ormond Beach Hotel was a wonderful hotel on the Halifax River. It would be torn down in the 1990s. If anybody reads American Heritage Magazine, they did a feature on the Ormond Beach Hotel before they tore it down, about 1994 or so, calling it the Ghost Hotel. They went in and took pictures before they tore it down. Mr. Flagler's largest hotel was the Royal Poinciana. This hotel was a hotel in Palm Beach that people would stay at and go across the island to go down by the breakers. The size of this hotel is absolutely immense. It took him 16 years to build it in completion. When it was done, it had 1,200 guest rooms. It had, oh, here you go. If you got a message from the front desk, a bellman on a bicycle brought it to you. There are over 3.5 miles of hallways in this building. Eventually, he'd be persuaded by a lady named Julia Tuttle to bring his hotels down to Miami. She was a widow who had retired down there, was a friend of John D. Rockefeller's, and in some extent, Mr. Flagler's from Cleveland. But she wanted Mr. Flagler to bring his hotel south. He was done. He didn't want to go much further south than Palm Beach. He was 63, 64 years old. He was pretty much done until a freeze hit South Florida, frankly, entire state of Florida. If it was chilly today when you got up, it was nothing compared to the freeze of 1894, 95, when as far south as Vero Beach, they had temperatures under 20 degrees. The citrus industry was ruined. It did not hit Miami. Julia Tuttle sent him a spray of orange and lemon blossom, said, hey, if you believe in Florida, come on down to Miami, and you'll see that we escaped that freeze. It was compelling salesmanship on her part. He would come down, and now this is the Secretary Treasurer of Standard Oil competing with his poor little widow, so you might guess who got the better of the deal. And you might be wrong. She owned about 650 acres right on what's Biscayne Bay, right where Bayside is now. He got 100 acres off the top to build this hotel and a golf course, and then they split the remaining 550 acres. He got half, she got half. But picture a checkerboard. He got the black squares, he got the red squares. So if he was going to build a road, connect a utility, or do anything to develop, he had to develop her property as well. It was a fantastic deal for Julia Tuttle. But what happens in Florida when you have a construction boom? What do you listen for almost right away? A bust. Julia Tuttle took her profits and poured them further into Miami. There was a worse freeze. Half of Miami burned down in 1898, and she was practically bankrupt in 1899 when she passed away from a brain hemorrhage. It's very sad. She's called the mother of Miami and absolutely deserves that. Matter of fact, the Chamber of Commerce in Miami has the Julia Tuttle Award for the outstanding business down there. So that really reflects her profound influence on Miami. But I bring all that up to get us back to the Continental Beach. I'm not going to get into the 2 hotels he built in the Bahamas or the hotel that was built in Key West after he died. But I will say he found his way back up into your First Coast area to build this hotel. And I think that might be a good place for me to stop right now so we don't go over time. But if there are any questions, as Ross Perot once said, I'm all ears.
How about if I relay questions, because our experience is about more than 10 feet, it's hard to understand. But do you have any questions about the development of Florida? Yeah.
Could he comment a little bit on the transition from Flagler being a hotel to a university, and was the Flagler family involved in that decision?
All right, Ed.
I heard the whole question. We're good there.
Oh,
We're
okay,
good there.
great.
First off, it's a great question because the the Ponce de Leon Hotel was in serious trouble in the 1960s. They weren't sure what they were going to do with it. It hadn't opened for several years. Mr. Flagler's third wife, this won't be on the quiz. It's kind of complicated. Mr. Flagler's third wife had a favored niece. They didn't have any kids together, so they had a favored niece named Louise Clisby Wise Lewis. She would be the one that would inherit Mr. Flagler's house up in St. Augustine, his house down here in Palm Beach, and a mansion they had up in Westchester County in Mamaroneck, New York. She would dispose of those houses first. She would keep the house up in St. Augustine, and because of that, she kept very close ties with the hotel. But she didn't have Flagler money. I mean, the Flagler money went a lot of different ways at the end of his life, trusts that benefit the University of North Carolina, things like that. Also money that helped Stetson College, by the way. She would die prematurely. She would die before she was 50 years old. So then the estate became even more complicated. They decided to develop a trust that would turn that old hotel into a college. Louise Clisby Wise Lewis at that point, and her kids would become instrumental in Flagler College evolving from the Ponce de Leon Hotel. A great source on this, and if I can remember his name, I can see it in a book right over here. A great source on this is called Mr. Flagler's St. Augustine. It's written by an emeritus dean at the Flagler College named, bear with me here, Thomas Graham, Graham. He's brilliant, okay? It's a very scholastic book, but it's very readable. But he talks a lot about that transition of the hotel into a college. So I would highly recommend that book, Mr. Flagler's St. Augustine, to give you even more detail than I've given you here.
So any other questions? Yeah, Les?
Yeah, as I understand it, Mr. Flagler built most of all of the churches in St. Augustine, and part of the reason was he wasn't sure which denomination God was, and he figured he had it all covered if he built all of them. And he's buried in one of the churches. I think it's the Episcopal Church, and he's buried.
I think I can help you with all that. I'm pretty sure I can.
I didn't want to repeat that and get struck by lightning as I walked out the door.
I was going to say, it's and by the way, there's a lot of accuracy in the question, okay? Mr. Flagler's father was a Presbyterian minister up in well, actually in the Finger Lakes region of New York and eventually Ohio. He wanted Mr. Flagler to become a minister, but Flagler knew he was going to be a man of business. That's a whole nother story. But he was quite devout. Matter of fact, he didn't like golf being played on his golf courses on Sunday because of what guys like Mike and I say after about every other shot. It's true, but he did allow it. He did not build all the churches, but if you go to St. Augustine and you go to the Flagler College, if you go about a block north and west of it, there's a church called the Presbyterian Memorial Church. He built that to celebrate the life of his oldest daughter. She died after she gave birth to the first Flagler grandbaby, who also died. He would bring both of them south, build that church to honor her. That's why it's the Presbyterian Memorial Church. Mr. Flagler's first wife is entombed there. They're not buried there. They're entombed there. And Mr. Flagler's remains also are there. He built a second church about a block away. I'm not sure if it was because he wanted to cover his bases with the big guy upstairs, but it was just something he would do. He built a church in front of Whitehall, the Flagler Museum. It was actually his home back then, called the Royal Ponciana Chapel. And again, it was interdenominational as well. And it was to support the worship needs of guests that were coming down to the Royal Ponciana Hotel, which was about 100 yards away. So he would build churches. He did not build synagogue, not because of any anti-Semitism, mostly because he was building for what the traffic was at that point. And but you are correct. He is entombed at one of the churches, and I highly encourage you to visit it. I visited it about 25 years ago with my wife, and we went up to St. Augustine when I first started doing all this. And a guide gave us a tour through there. The lady was blind. She gave us a narrative tour. She walked my wife and myself around the Presbyterian Memorial Church. And I'm not saying this to be noble, humble, or anything in between. It was the best guided tour I have ever had in my life. She was brilliant. I also have been informed, because she was quite elderly then, that she is no longer with us. But the fact of the matter is, it's a big part of the Flagler story if you ever get to St. Augustine.
Are we doing on time? We got one more, Randy?
So interesting fact for you, and I love seeing the picture of the Atlantic Beach Hotel. In my living room is a middle grand piano, which was in the Atlantic Beach Hotel.
Wow. That's impressive.
Piano. From there, it went to the Le Chateau restaurant, and there are actually cigarette burns in the piano where it had been the bar piano my parents bought in the 1960s from Le Chateau.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So you weren't there when it was in the hotel?
No.
No, okay.
Well, the only thing I wish you had done is maybe stretch the point a little bit and said that piano music at the beginning of your lunch today was from that piano, but I can accept the fact that's the truth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No, I'm honored. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks for keeping me on time, Mike.
Thank you, Ed. Again, join us next week for our speaker.